Hello and welcome. You're watching Global Lens. I'm Parikshit Luthra. These are the top global headlines we are tracking. Crude oil prices rally after United States steps up the pressure on Russia, imposes sanctions on two of Russia's largest oil companies. This comes a day after President Trump shelved a proposed summit with President Putin. Russia ramps up attacks on Ukraine and conducts nuclear drills. Prime Minister Modi will not be travelling to Malaysia for the ASEAN summit, ending speculation of a meeting with President Trump on the sidelines. Foreign Minister Jaishankar to represent India, and Prime Minister will also attend the summit virtually. Tesla's profits declined for the fourth straight quarter despite record sales as tariffs and research costs take a toll. IBM boosts growth outlook after reporting orders worth nearly $10 billion for its AI business. Asian markets traded lower amid rising U.S. China tensions following China's unexpected restrictions on rare earth exports. Reports suggest that the U.S. was caught off guard and is now considering retaliatory measures, including possible curbs on software-related exports. Despite rising tensions, China's exports to the U.S. showed resilience, reaching around $26 billion in July, up over $7 billion from June. From January to July 2025, total exports stood at approximately $194 billion, down from about 20% the same period last year. Now, as per Bloomberg, U.S. is exporting goods worth $1 billion daily from China. Overall, while exports have declined, the drop is not drastic, highlighting the resilience of Chinese shipments to the United States. Amid these tensions, U.S. President Donald Trump had praised progress in talks with China. Meanwhile, China's top leaders have vowed to strengthen their technological capabilities. Trump, however, maintains that the U.S. aims to strike a deal on all issues ahead of his meeting with Chinese President Xi Jinping in South Korea.
I think we'll make a deal. I think we're going to make a deal on the rare earth is the least of it. Look, the tariffs are much more powerful than the rare earth. The rare earth is a disturbance, but there's a lot of rare earth around. I'll tell you, I've had more calls on rare earth. We've got it, everybody's. We'll make a deal on, I think, everything. I think we're going to make a deal on soybeans and the farmers.
All right, let's now go across to Shaun, the founder and managing director of China Market Research Group. He's joining us from Beijing. Shaun, thanks for being with us. Our first question, President Trump, before the meeting, has said, we're going to have a fantastic deal with China, but has also mentioned that if the deal does not happen, China could face tariffs to the tune of 150%. How do you think China is getting ready for that sit-down meeting?
Well, basically, it's great to be here. For 7 years, ever since Trump first launched his trade war against China, and then Biden ratcheted up the export controls and sanctions, to Trump coming back for Liberation Day tariffs, China has been preparing for Trump 2.0 and tariffs 2.0. So they are sitting here right now with all the leverage in the world. Now, Scotty Bessent, the U.S. Treasury Secretary, is either deluded or he's getting misinformed by his underlings, because he's telling President Trump, he's telling the American public that the United States has the upper hand in the trade war. That's just not true. China has put on potential rare earth export restrictions, not just to the United States, but also throughout the entire world. Now, why is this important? Because rare earths power the world's $7 trillion consumer electronic economy. And China has almost a near monopoly on rare earths. They refine about 85–90% of all rare earths, but the key is they refine 99% of the high-end rare earths. Without these, Trump can't get his F-100 pickups at Ford to be able to run properly in the United States. Without these rare earths, you're not going to get Apple iPhones being used in Santa Monica or in Boston in America. And without Chinese rare earths, America is not going to be able to buy radars and build radars and weapons from Lockheed Martin and Raytheon. So going into these potential meetings with Xi Jinping and Donald Trump at the APEC meetings in South Korea, the Chinese and Xi Jinping feel they have the upper hand in the trade war, and they are going to push hard back. They've got the grit, they've got the determination, and they've got the R word, or resolve, to push back against the Americans and show America and the rest of the world China can no longer be bullied by Western imperial powers. I think Trump is
Shaun.
overplaying his hand, which is why he's sitting there saying, we're going to have a good meeting with Xi, and maybe the tariffs will come down because they're not sustainable.
Right. Shaun, what I'd also like to ask you, that repeatedly what we're seeing now is that, yes, China's retaliation is against the US because of the tariff threats from there, but the actions have a global impact. When China is putting restrictions on rare earth exports, they began that from the 1st of April onwards, and now from the 1st of April onwards, and now they've threatened to increase the set of actions on rare earth from the 8th of November onwards. Now, these have a major global impact. Why is China doing that? You are attacking the US, but why target all nations and companies globally?
That's a great question, and I think it's a fair criticism that India and other countries have levied at China. What have they done to China to deserve these rare earth export control threats? The United States, everybody recognized. Trump has been launching tariffs on not just China, but also India, with crippling 50% tariffs in your part of the world. So people understand why China has to push back against American bullying. But I agree with many of the criticisms that it doesn't make sense that China is doing that for other countries. The other thing is, look, when the United States started doing the export controls on semiconductors to China, did China just fall down? No, what did they do? They started building up their own indigenous innovation sector. They've marshaled hundreds of millions of dollars between the public sector and the private sector to build up great semiconductor chips, which is why in the last quarter, NVIDIA has sold 0 H2O chips to China. Jensen Huang, the founder of NVIDIA, said that his market share in China went from 95% to 0 because China didn't lie down and they built up their own indigenous innovation in semiconductors. I think that China might have overplayed its hand, and now you're going to see other countries from Australia to India to Vietnam to Europe are going to say, wait a minute, if China can take away our rare earths, we need to bolster our own refining processes. Now, the reality is the United States is 5 to 10 years behind China. Other countries might be even farther behind, aside from maybe Australia, which has the Linus refinery. But yeah, I agree that some of the criticisms are fair. So what has China done in the last couple days? I believe it's Wang Wentao, the Minister of Finance, has met with the heads of major multinationals in Beijing. And he said, don't worry, we are going to continue to give you rare earths. We're going to continue to supply. We are not saying we're not going to sell to you. We just want it to be shown that if it's dual export, and shown that if it's going to go to the United States, that we don't want it to be sold that way. But we're going to keep supplying the rest of the world. I think that China made this maneuver to threaten the United States, but didn't realize how big of the pushback would be from other countries. And that's why they're trying to do a PR crisis and talk to other countries, because there was fair criticism of what Beijing did.
Shaun,
which I think was an unintended consequence.
Absolutely. What we've seen from the beginning of the Trump administration, that Trump has delivered very sharp rhetoric against China, and we've seen threats from both sides, followed by a truce. This has happened every 2 to 3 months. Is China going to give up its leverage on rare earth and say that we are going to remove these controls, these restrictions, these licenses for rare earth magnet exports around the world and also to the US? Or do you expect that despite whatever deal that is achieved between President Trump and Xi Jinping in South Korea, these restrictions will continue?
I think that they're going to have the threat of restrictions, but they're going to ease things, because I think at the end of the day, China wants to come to a trade agreement with Trump. Now, they're not going to humiliate themselves. They're not going to be willing to be oppressed or bullied. They want to show the world that China has arrived as a rival superpower and can't endure another century of humiliation at the hands of Western imperial and colonial powers like they did in the 19th century. So they're going to push back hard, but I think they'll make accommodations. I think they're going to say, you know what, we're going to buy a lot of soybeans. I think they're going to say, we promise for maybe 90 days or maybe 180 days that we won't add any more restrictions on rare earth. But the key is, after the Madrid meetings between Scotty Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury from the U.S., and He Lifeng, the Vice Premier, the Chinese felt that they had a deal. And they feel that the Americans broke the agreement by slapping on more export controls on about 2,000 Chinese-affiliated companies, and also by adding port fees for any Chinese-made vessel that was landing in the United States. You got to remember, about 54% of all major ocean liners for shipping are built in China, while the United States only makes about 0.5% of the world total. So that was going to add, just to Costco, a major shipping company in China, $3 billion a year in port fees. So that's like adding more tariffs. So the Chinese feel that they can't trust the United States and that the U.S. broke the agreement. But I do think at the end of the day, China wants a deal. They just want to make money. They just want to be able to get FDI back into China. They want to get the domestic economy moving again, and they want to recreate the happiness and animal spirits within China, because anxiety is still hitting the economy. Q3 was quite weak on retail sales with only 3% year-on-year growth. That's down from about 4.2% from the previous 6 months. So China knows, let's get a deal. Let's make it good so that we can get the economy going, but it's got to be fair. We cannot be oppressed by the United States anymore.
Shaun, what kind of assurance is China looking for this time around? We believe that Taiwan will also be on the table, and because Donald Trump has raised the rhetoric to such heights, China will demand lesser U.S. interference and role in Taiwan. Is that possible?
It is possible, and I think here's the key. China has almost made a mistake by saying how much of a red line Taiwan is, because that gives leverage to Trump. So Trump can say, okay, you give us the rare earths, maybe we will issue another proclamation reaffirming our belief in the one China policy. And then Trump might get the rare earths again. I think it's such a sensitive topic in China that the Chinese, they've given up the leverage when it comes to Taiwan. Now, Trump has said that he doesn't think that Xi wants to invade Taiwan, and I agree with that. I think fears of an actual invasion are overblown. If you've seen in the last week, the KMT, or the Kuomintang, the opposition party in Taiwan to the DPP, they just had a new chairperson who's a woman. And she has been always talking about good relations with China, the mainland. And she has said, I believe yesterday, that she would be willing to meet with Xi Jinping himself. And over the last 2 years, you've seen the former president of Taiwan, Ma, who's also a KMT member, has been to China, has been feted as a hero, and has met with Xi Jinping himself. So in my mind, mainland China doesn't want to have any armed aggression with Taiwan. They want to wait for the KMT, hopefully to win the presidency in a couple of years, and slowly and peacefully reintegrate Taiwan into the oversight of mainland China in the same way that China was able to regain control of Hong Kong and Macau. So I think the Taiwan issue, I'm not overly worried about war. I'm not worried about armed conflict, because China wants to do this peacefully, and they also view Taiwanese as their cousins. They don't want to kill people that they consider to be their own. And I think Trump is going to maybe reaffirm the one China policy, and that would make Beijing be more willing to sell more rare earths. But at the end of the day, if 6 months from now or 9 months from now, Trump lies again and breaks his promises, China has let everyone know that monopoly on rare earths is their ace in the hole. That's their ace card.
Mr. Rein, thank you very much for joining us. Let's see what happens when Trump and Xi Jinping meet. Moving on to a quick look at some other stories. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has warned Israel against the annexation of the occupied West Bank. This comes after a bill to apply Israeli law to the region cleared a preliminary vote in the Knesset days after U.S. President Donald Trump formalized the Gaza peace plan. Rubio said Israel's move threatens the peace deal. This comes ahead of his visit to Israel. European Union leaders met in Brussels with Ukrainian President Zelensky to discuss long-term aid for Kyiv and challenges facing the bloc's new migration policy. The summit follows fresh EU and US sanctions on Russia, which Zelensky called very important to compel Putin to end the war. Thailand's defense minister has said that his country and Cambodia have made significant progress in peace talks this week. This comes ahead of a potential ceasefire signing on Sunday. US President Trump is expected to witness the deal at the ASEAN summit in Kuala Lumpur. The agreement aims to ease tensions after a deadly 5-day border conflict in July left at least 48 dead and displaced thousands. Officials have already agreed on 4 key points, with US and Malaysian observers present. Volvo Cars posted stronger than expected profits of $552 million in the third quarter. Despite tariffs and tough competition, its earnings were largely driven by its ongoing cost-cutting program, which included 3,000 layoffs and slow investments. Its revenue fell to $9.1 billion, but beat analyst expectations. The company recently took steps to move production of some hybrids to America in the coming years. Social media giant Reddit has sued AI company Perplexity for illegally scrapping user posts to train its AI model. In a court filing in New York, Reddit has also named 3 other defendants, alleging that they extracted copyright content by masking their identities and disguising their web scrapers as regular people. Perplexity has denied these allegations and accused Reddit of extortion. Facebook parent Meta has fired at least 600 people from its AI division, a spokesperson told CNBC. The layoffs hit teams across AI infrastructure, research and product roles, but the top hires in TBD labs remain safe. The move came after Meta spent $14.3 billion on AI and its super intelligence labs, but faced a lukewarm response to Llama 4 models. The laid-off employees will get 16 weeks severance plus extra pay for the number of years served. Time for a short break, but don't go anywhere. Tesla's net profits slumped 37% despite reporting record revenue in the third quarter. We break down the numbers with tech analyst Dan Ives on the other side. Welcome back to Global Lens. Shares of Tesla came under pressure as the EV maker's profits fell for the 4th straight quarter despite record revenue in the September quarter. Revenue rose 12% year-on-year to hit $28 billion as buyers rushed to take advantage of the electric vehicle tax credit, which ended last month. Tesla delivered a record 497,000 vehicles in the third quarter. However, net income declined 37% due to increased costs, with margins tightening to their lowest level in several years. High tariffs and heavy spending on tech also weighed on the profits. As per CFO Webb of the Nature, tariffs on auto part imports cost Tesla more than $400 million during the quarter. In the earnings call, CEO Elon Musk emphasized on robotaxis and humanoid robots for future growth, but failed to provide a clear guidance on EV sales. Tesla is not alone. General Motors recently warned that its earnings could take a hit after US slashed the EV tax credit and eased rules governing emissions, a move that is expected to hurt EV demand. To discuss more about how federal policies are impacting automakers in the United States and the road ahead for Tesla, I'm joined by Dan Ives, Global Head of Tech Research at Wedbush Securities. Dan, thank you very much for joining us. So, how do you think Tesla is going to perform here on? And what do you feel about their roadmap when it comes to FSD, when it comes to autonomous vehicles, and generally increasing sales in geographies such as Europe and China, where things have been under stress?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that if you look at demand stabilization, I think that's really the key word, especially in China. I mean, China's seeing an uptick. That's the first time really in the last year. But look, the reality is the story going forward, this is about AI. I mean, the AI roadmap now at Tesla, autonomous and robotics continue to be key. We talk about autonomous is worth $1 trillion. We'll go into the story. That's the focus for investors, when you actually look at the story going forward as a physical AI play. And that's why Musk, wartime CEO, leading it.
Right. So you're saying that for Tesla investors, the kind of progress the company makes on artificial intelligence and autonomous will be the key. Now, as far as the pay package for the Tesla CEO is concerned. Now, there has been a lot of scrutiny over the proposed $1 trillion pay package. What do you think is going to happen in the next few weeks? And what will it mean for the continuation of Elon Musk as CEO?
Yeah, look, I think overwhelmingly gets approved November 6th. The reality, the biggest asset for Tesla is Musk. And Musk will lead Tesla into this AI autonomous robotics chapter. Look, $1 trillion pay package based on all the incentives. But, you go back to the last one, everyone said that that was ridiculous and yet exceeded everything in terms of the pay package, right? Because he hit all those metrics. Look, Tesla needs Musk. And despite, obviously some that are looking at this controversial, I don't view it like that. I view it as you need to make sure Musk is locked in as CEO of Tesla for the coming years. And he's key to, what I view as a $2 trillion and ultimately $3 trillion valuation.
Right. I would also like to ask you about, the drop in profits that we've seen and the continuous drop in profits. Is that a worry? And do you think Tesla will be able to turn things around?
Look, it's a worry. I mean, in the near term, obviously, the credits coming off, tax credits, right? That's huge, high margin business. They've improved free cash flow if you look at overall profitability on a lot of the other units. But look, you're talking about a company that this all works. You're looking at $2-3 of earnings going to $12-15 earnings, $20 earnings. And when you think about the autonomous and robotics roadmap, that's really the focus. And also, I think, but look, a stabilization that's finally happened in Tesla, at least from a demand perspective.
Right. Going forward, what do you think is going to define the success of Tesla? Considering the kind of competition they face in China and other geographies, what will be the definition of their success according to investors?
Yeah, I think, look, definition of success is not necessarily deliveries, because I don't think that that's moving the needle significantly, right? I mean, obviously, unless it swings massively one way or another. Look, what's going to define it, it's robotaxi scaling, 30 to 35 cities, true level 4 autonomous, robotics in terms of Optimus starting to get to some sort of volume production next year. I mean, look, it's the most important chapter in Tesla's history. And that's why it's so important Musk is at the helm.
Right. U.S. tariffs, what is the role that U.S. tariffs is playing in the fall in profits for Tesla?
Yeah, I mean, 400 million. I mean, let's think about it, maybe like 15% of the profit cut is because of tariffs or maybe a ripple effect. Yeah, so it's real, right, in terms of the impact. And that's on the big question is, especially when you look at robotics and autonomous, does that start to get exclusions from a tariff perspective, just given administration and some of this arms race with China? So I think that continues to be something that I think we'll be seeing more of in the coming months, potential developments.
Right. As someone who observes Tesla very closely, did you get any sense of how Tesla is performing in the midst of these rare earth exports, export controls that have been imposed by China? And in case there is no deal between President Trump and Xi Jinping in South Korea, and if these fresh set of export controls come into effect from the 8th of November, how will Tesla be impacted in terms of production?
Look, we continue to think there's going to be some deal, right? So I do think Bark's worse in the bite here when it ultimately plays out. We'll see what happens in South Korea in terms of movement. But for Tesla, I mean, just given their footprint in China, they do have an advantage, right? I mean, just given that massive footprint relative to other U.S. companies. So, look, they'll be impacted. I mean, when you think about, like, the magnets that's needed, and especially in terms of robotics, autonomous, I mean, they're impacted like anyone else. But I do think relatively, they're a little more insulated because of the China footprint.
Right. I'd like to ask you about their India entry. Now, Tesla entered India with great fanfare a few months back. They started deliveries since September, Dan, and from what we realized that they've delivered just about 100 vehicles. Do you think this would be way below their estimates for the India market? Would this be disappointing for Elon Musk, or these are just early signs and he would be here for the long term? How do you see this?
It's just an early sign. I mean, me and you have talked about it before. Rome wasn't built in a day. So when you look at India, they were cautious on that market. They've aggressively gone after. Now, I think you're going to continue to see a significant expansion there. And this is something you will start to get much more volumes in 2026 and into next year. But I think I view this as sort of baby steps to a much broader strategy.
Right. Do you expect Tesla to now put up more production lines in the Asia-Pacific region? Do you think India will be that market, or it's too early and they might take a call on that in 5 years from now?
No, I mean, I continue to think production is going to ramp in that region. India clearly is going to play a key role. But I think for them, it's really trying to see the demand story as this plays out. Also, you're going to have some other vehicles that they produce, right, in terms that they're going to go after. But look, it's really taking a page out of Apple's playbook. When you look at how they've attacked different markets, obviously India being one of them, and I think that's what Tesla's going to go after.
All right. Thank you very much, Dan Ives, for joining us on the program, giving us your view on Tesla's performance and what will it take for Tesla investors to continue believing in the Tesla story in the next few months. With that, it's a wrap on another edition of Global Lens. Many thanks for watching. Goodbye.